updates. They just launched in September. And then focus on how we can lower your TCO by going with a product like UCS. So as I just said, we'll start with the product update, then start talking about TCO, and we'll have some time for question and answers at the end. But definitely please feel free to stop me anytime, ask a question. I really like this slide. UCS has only been around for 5 years. And it's crazy to think that in 5 years, they are now the #1 blade server in the US, and they're #2 worldwide. And after 2 years when they launched in 2011, they were #3 in the US and worldwide both. So I mean, just to accomplish this much in over 5 years is amazing. Especially, when Cisco first came out with this, I know my thought was, seriously, come on, Cisco servers? But they really nailed it on this one. This is a great product. Just kind of forecast a little bit of the TCO. What we're going to be talking about here is these 5 sections to where we'll talk about servers and warranty, how UCS helps lower cost in all of these, especially networking, cabling, power and cooling, managing, provisioning. A lot of areas that a lot of people aren't really thinking about when it comes to your OpEx expenditures. A lot of people are just looking at CapEx, what's it going to cost to buy it, but they don't really think about what am I paying to actually deploy. So first, a quick look here at the product updates. Actually, just kind of, since a lot of you already know about UCS, I'll just kind of quickly go over this. UCS, as you know, is really a single management system built into the Fabric Interconnects. So you have your Fabric Interconnect, which is really almost like your top-of-rack switches that has your system manager built into it. So right there, we're looking at saving expenditures because we're not having to buy extra management software, or we're not having to buy extra server licenses to deploy and set up that management software. So that would be UCS Manager. The Fabric Interconnect, that is your, like I said, top-of-rack switch. And coming into that is your Fabric extenders. So if we're looking at the B series, which is blade chassis, you have these 2 Fabric extenders into the blade series. And really, that's just an extension of the Fabric Interconnect. So if you, in a few slides, you're going to see that you can, plug in your Fabric extender 2230 switches. Really, it's just the same thing, but in the chassis. So you're not having a separate layer of management. The 5108 blade chassis. This year, Cisco, we'll see in a minute, has made me a liar. I've said that they'll always have the 5108 blade chassis. They still have it, but they updated it, and it's good for a good reason. Blade servers, you have half blade servers and full width blade servers, so you can have up to 8 half width blade servers. And how it ties all in is the mezzanine adapters into those blade servers. Very important how UCS is built just in the Fabric. So this year, UCS has introduced the UCS M4 line. The top of this slide is your C-Series line, and the bottom is your new blade servers. So we have the UCS 240 M4, which is just an update of the previous 240, and the UCS 220 M4. Again, just the newer Intel processors, newer bit cards for networking, some more expanded hard drive options. So really just upgrading the hardware. And also to really take note, Cisco is the first server vendor to put DDR4 memory into their servers. So all the M4 lines are going to come with DDR4 memory. What that does is it gives you faster speed on memory, and it's also going to cut your cooling costs as well. Makes the memory runs a little bit cooler, so you're not having to spend so much and try interesting that Cisco would do this with such a new technology, because usually the trend with memory is to let it work out in the workstation market, see how it does, and then they'll kind of move into the server market. Just Cisco kind of looked at the benefits of it being much faster and much cooler, that they wanted to put it into their servers right away. Some of the more popular ones here, I'll kind of just highlight the Cisco UCS C20. I see this deployed as really the C220 line as you can use it for anything. A pizza box server that you just need one of, for customers that just don't have the need for the B series yet, which I think that actually really changes with UCS Mini, which I'll go into in a second. But the great thing about this is this can be used from a very small organization up to your enterprises. NWN has sold that whole wide range. A lot in the enterprise, we're looking at customers that need some type of card, expansion card that goes into it that can't put into a blade server, so we've got to look at the C series. You look here at the two E5, E3 CPUs, that's the new Intel chips that have just come out, up to 18 cores per socket. So you could potentially have 36 cores per server. 20-core DDR4 DIMM slots, so you're looking at 24 times 32 when it comes to memory. And the C220 has up to 8 slots for internal storage if you need it, and the module long, which is actually pretty cool. It puts your bit card directly onto the motherboard, so you're not taking up a PCIe slot in the back. It gives you room to, if you want to put like a flash card in there or another network card. The B200, again, just updated with the newer processors, the new memory, 80 gigs of backplane available. So essentially, with the fabric extenders on the back of the B-Series chassis, you can have 4 to 8 ports on that. So the server itself will handle 80 gigs of I/O. And how it does that is it takes 40 and 40 from each fabric extender, and it does the throughput. So it's kind of misleading a little bit. You're not going to be using both at the same time. But it's almost like if you were to put a ether channel. You put two 1 gig ports together in an ether channel, but you still only get 1 gig at a time. But you get told that's 2 gigs. But it's no global route. So in theory, you are getting 80 gigs, and up to 160 for a whole chassis. So I'm really excited about this UCS Mini. As soon as I found out about this, as soon as I found it in our quoting tool, I started looking at it. I tell you that if you're looking at 3 pizza box C-Series chassis, 3 of those is pretty much going to get you started on UCS Mini with 2 blades. And this is great because it all kind of ties in back into the management part we're going to talk about a little bit later. But if you, if you're in college, I'm from Raleigh, so let's take a Duke or UNC or NC State. So if one of them were to open up a satellite campus on the other side of the state, they could look at deploying UCS Mini in that place, and they'll be able to manage it centrally from the location. And if you look at the pictures here, what we tend to find in those remote locations is exactly what the pictures show. You have kind of different servers that have collected over time, what was the cheapest at the time, or look at if you're in your main office and you have that branch somewhere else, or to where you have someone who may not know servers, or you have no IT at all. So you're usually left with an administrative assistant helping you out. Well, it's kind of hard, talking to an administrative assistant, trying to describe. They have no UCS Mini really takes that enterprise level and now it's allowing you to put it out into your branches, or it's just a small business or a small, small utilities company that in the past they weren't able to look at blade servers. So it's a scalable solution, and let's get to the next slide here, that it's scalable because right now you can put 8 blades and up to 7 servers into the UCS Mini. So you can have 8 blades and then you can start adding C-series servers, but starting next year, early next year, they're supposed to update the firmware to where you can actually have 16 blades, so you have 2 chassis. The chassis is a 6R, 6RU rack mount, up to 8 blades, up to 7 rack servers, and what they did was that they took the fabric interconnects, and which fabric interconnects is really kind of just a Nexus switch that's recoded for the UCS. So what they've done is they've taken that from a 24, 48 port switch down into the fabric extenders onto the back of the chassis. So on the back of that chassis, you'll see 4 unified fabric ports and 1 40 gig port, along with a 1 gig Ethernet port. And what that allows you to do on those fabric ports, you can put 1 or 10 gig connections. So if you don't have 10 gig network, you don't have to worry about implementing that infrastructure. You can do a 4-port virtual port channel. So you can get your 4 gig. And then you can have 40 port. This is actually, I thought this was pretty cool. The 40 port has a cable that basically splits up into 4 10 gig ports. So you can take those 4 1 gig ports if you want to do, well, yeah, 4 10 gig ports. So you have those 4 10 gig ports, and if you wanted to do, so that'd be 4 C-series servers, and if you wanted that to be more, you would have to do either 1 gig or 10 gig up into those unified ports. But I'll show you that here in the next slide. Those of you that looked into the B-series chassis, the big challenge has always been, especially for the smaller customers, is the power requirements. It's always required the 240, so those big C19 power cables. Well, you've always had to have that. It's not always feasible for a smaller data center or smaller company to put that in. This has gone to the standard 120 volt that your normal servers will hold. And the way they've done that is in the UCS Manager, they have allowed power capping per server. And also, so if the server is not high demand, you can go in and set policies to lower your power resources for them. So that's new with the UCS Mini, and right now that is only available on the UCS Mini. They released the new UCS Manager, which is 3.0, which can only be used right now with the UCS Mini. You can't use it in your standard UCS environment. So we look here, I was talking about the fabric interconnect, and we look at we've always looked at the card in the back of the chassis as a fabric extender. Well, now it's just a 6324 fabric interconnect. So really it's a 4-port, 1 or 10 gig, and 1 40 gig port. So we're going to break down here. If you're familiar with the fabric interconnect, it has what is called in-host mode. What that does is it takes away any ability for network groups to come in. And so it uses the in-host model. The fabric interconnect, you can put in-host or switching model. Switching models, when you have to get more detail on how you're setting it up. Make sure you don't have any loopbacks. But here we have the management port. So that's your out-of-band management. USB port, this is new for the chassis. With the UCS Mini, you can now do updates via USB stick. So you just put a USB stick in there with your updates on there. For the 4 10 gig ports, SFP+, If you're not familiar with SFP Plus, it's the one that has the little metal thing at the end of the cable. Instead of using fiber, I mean those fiber cords, they're $1,000 each, versus an SFP Plus cable, coax cable, it's like $250. It's a no-brainer. You can use it, like I said, it's a unified port, so you can use Ethernet, 5-channel over Ethernet, and also iSCSI. Server direct attach only, no fabric extender. So there's no fabric extender like we're dealing with before that had to go up to another switch. This is now your top of rack switch inside your chassis, going up to a core, essentially. And then your 140 gig port, which is QSFP plus. It breaks down, like I said earlier, it breaks down into 4 10 gig ports. Console port. Any questions on the UCS menu? Pretty cool. I mean, I think so. Especially when you look at those pictures of the closets, and especially when you start to look at UCS Central. We'll look at that here in a minute. I mean, it's really cool. Also, just some new products that also came out this year. These are not updates, these are actually brand new products. The UCS C3160 rack server, I think is a beast. Okay? You have, what is it? It doesn't say it there, I don't have it in my notes. 62 drive bays. So this is great if you need to store media. If you have security cameras, your street cameras, security cameras in schools, this is great for that. I mean, it's basically just a bunch of hard drive disks using a C-series, C-series backbone, and if you don't want to add a whole other storage device, this is a great tool, a great server to look at. But it is a beast. And also UCS M series. I just wanted to point this out. If you look at it, the pictures I have here, you'll see basically 8 inserts in the front. And what they've done here is they've taken your typical server and they have stripped everything out except for CPU memory. So those servers actually share all the backplane, your power. Even the blade servers don't do that. Every server has their own backplane. Every server has its own network card. This takes all of that and puts it in the back of the server. I couldn't fit another picture in here to show the open case. But the reason why I showed that bottom picture there is because you see 8 slots there, but each slot is actually 2 servers. So each case holds 16 servers. Here's a caveat though. This is for very large data. Cisco will tell you that they don't expect to sell individual chassis of this. You're basically buying a rack or a row. But I did want to bring it up, because large databases, just large data mining. Anybody wants to start a new Facebook, this is where you're going to go with. So let's start looking at TCL a little bit. So we're talking about CEO. What does UCS bring to the table? Well, UCS is going to eliminate your I/O adapters, and also with UCS, they tend to usually just have more compute power, so you're usually going to end up buying fewer servers. There's been a lot of situations to where we've taken customers from 4 racks down to 1, just because going from their old 1U servers, 2U servers, and we are usually doubling or tripling their processing and compute, and just putting them in 1 rack. Limiting I/O adapters. I remember about 5 or 6 years ago, I was working for a company. We were opening up a data center. I was so excited because, I got to set up, I was basically, I got to set up everything, basically for a greenfield data center that we're going to host customers in. And I was so excited putting in 8 switches in each rack. And I'll tell you, by the end of the day, I wasn't so excited because each server had 10 cables coming out of it. The first 5 or 6 were pretty good, but then, you start getting up the rack and you're trying to figure out how do I fit those certain, cables into the side to make it look neat. Especially data center where customers are going to come into. You want it to look neat, you want to have a good presentation. Well, here on the left is that traditional setup that you would usually have, your top of rack switches. You're usually going to have your production network, your IP SAN network, if you have one, your fiber channel switches, your out-of-band management. And they all, of course, they have to be 2 switches because you have to have HA for everything. Well, you take the UCS fabric interconnect, and you basically have your cables coming out of the chassis, or in this case, we're looking at the C-Series server. You have 2 10K ports coming out of it. So you have 2 cables for networking, you have 2 cables for power, you have 1 cable for your out-of-band management on the C-Series. Again, remember this, servers are only 5 years old, and then over that 5 years, they have set 99 world records when it comes to servers. So we're looking at 22 CPU records, 17 virtualization, 7 records with database. They've set up, records with Oracle, SQL, SAP, all the big HPC. So we're looking at Hadoop data there. They're just setting breaking benchmark records, and then these are against companies that have been around since the 70s. So to touch a little bit more on cabling, illuminated switches, and as you saw that slide a few slides ago, you used to have 6 to 8 switches per rack. And then you would have the cables going from those racks up into your core. So, your 8 switches, you're looking at only 16 cables going out of your rack and into another switch somewhere. Very important, fewer cables, fewer switches equals fewer cables. Another picture I love. The traditional rack, when I set up that data center, the one on the left, I could have easily done that. I'll be honest that I hope that it looked more like the middle, with a nightly crunch on the side. But the middle one, how many of you have had to try to go in and troubleshoot or replace a cable? This is a nightmare. you're like, yeah, you lose it, so you have to start over. We don't have that anymore with Cisco and UCS. This picture is a little misleading, I'll tell you. If you have 2 cables, coming out of each fabric extender, it could look like this, and it looks very close to this. But realistically, you're probably going to have 4. In more extreme places, you're probably going to have 8. So yeah, there's still going to be cables coming out, but it just looks so much nicer. And the thing is a lot of people forget about airflow. When you have cables that look like that, your servers are not working as hard to get air through it. Here on the left, those servers are probably a lot noisier than the ones on the right, just because they are struggling to get air through it. And they're probably running a little hot. So let's look at the evolution of blade servers. So we look at the traditional rack where you have 41U servers and you have your top of rack switches. And what we have here is, I'm sorry I keep turning around, I can actually see that better than my laptop. I guess I don't have my glasses. So they have 2 fiber channel switches, 2 Ethernet switches, and 2 rack management switches. Okay, so they have 6 switches there at the top. Yeah, 2 rack managers. So traditionally, large server companies, they took that method and just condensed it down into a 16U chassis. So in those chassis, you still have a switch, still in the back, you still have a full switch for your Ethernet, you have a full switch for driver channel, and then you have another switch for your out-of-band or rack management. So still, you're having to have all those cables come out of each and every chassis. I mean, it's still a lot of cables. I mean, blade servers, I've seen blade servers where it doesn't look much different than single one-use servers. And what's really helped out on the UCS side is your fabric-based infrastructure. What it does with that, the coaxial cable, SFP plus connections, it really takes everything that you need and allow you to put it in one connection. It is basically, I heard Greg saying actually this morning, it's almost like a software-defined infrastructure is what we're doing with UCS. So we're putting key pieces into place, and then we are defining what is running over that. So cabling, we are going to tell that cable that I want an Ethernet connection, and I want it at 1 gig. I'm going to put a policy in place to limit it to 1 gig. Or I want to do a boot from SAN, so I'm going to do fiber channel over Ethernet. And then I need to separate VLANs, so I'm going to create VLANs for management. I'm going to create VLANs for different production networks, or different IP storage networks. I'm going to create separate VLAN for SCSI, separate VLAN for NFS, and this all just goes right back up to that fabric interconnect. And cables are expensive. You can buy cheap cable, but you definitely want a better made cable, and they can start to add up. And here's an interesting chart here. So we're talking about adding. I talked about where they took that full length chart, or that full length cabinet that we're so used to with 40 servers and 6 switches on top, and then basically just condensed it down into 16. So here is the blue line, which is your total cost of ownership of a UCS as we start expanding. Now, a single UCS fabric interconnect, or what they call a UCS domain, can hold up to 160 servers. So that can be blade servers or C-series servers. So we take that 160, all the way up to 160. This one goes up to 96. So they all saw, they're pretty comparative price when we start out. We got to put that initial infrastructure in there. And if you look closely at this chart, at every 16, every time you have to add a new chassis, the other two competitors are going up much faster than the UCS. The reason behind that is because you are having to add new management software for every chassis. In some cases, when you get past the core chassis, you have to buy an enterprise manager to manage those chassis. And then you have to pay for a Windows license to install that management software. You're paying for more switches, every single chassis. You're paying for it all. And so you just notice every 16, the price just jumps, versus the UCS, where it's kind of slightly going up, because you have to pay for the hardware, but you're not paying for any new licenses. And this also would include time to deploy. UCS chassis is really just plug and play. You plug it in, the UCS manager goes in and finds it, it's there, and right away you can start deploying servers for it. So switching and cabling with rack servers. This was taken over, this is an example of Cisco UCS 240 M3 versus a traditional rack server. Again, complexity of traditional rack server environment. You have your Ethernet access, your production, your fiber channel, your fiber channel going back to fiber channel 4, your out-of-band management. That's versus just the fabric interconnect with some fabric extenders and Nexus 2232s. Again, the 2232s, it's all unified ports. So I can stick the SFP plus cables in there. I can stick fiber channel in there. I can stick 1 gig in there, as long as I get the right little thing for it. Pause, I can't remember what the thing is called. I'm not a network guy. I'm a server guy. Server and storage. So really, this is a TCO example. Really, if we're looking at a traditional solution going down to UCS solution, and the reason why I include this one in here, because you don't really think about it, but cabling, cabling, networking, that's the second biggest portion of this. And cabling is usually an afterthought. It really is. And people are really concentrated on how much compute I have, is this server, what's the price comparison? Well, a lot of people don't look at cables because maybe they already have a box of it. Well, they've most likely paid for those cables. It's got to come from somewhere. And they don't look at all the power that they need to put into it. So that leads right into power and cooling. Again here, we're just eliminating infrastructure, so less switches, less servers, and the unified fabric. So essentially, if you're looking at the UCS chassis, the 16 blade servers that are in it are usually drawing less power towards a competitor. If you turn on those 16 blades and they're running at full power, it is running less power than a competitor blade chassis that is just idle. The big reason for that is the fabric extenders in the back. Because you have 2 little fabric extenders. You don't have 3, sometimes 6 switches, depending on the vendor. Sometimes you have to have redundancy switches in the back. So every time you have to add those switches, again, if you don't think about it, you're adding power consumption because you need to run those switches. Fewer adapters support I/O requirements. This is more towards the C series. We're looking at putting the 10 gig infrastructure in there. And you can argue, well, I can put 10 gig ports in any server. You can, but those are not going into the fabric interconnect. And you also don't have a single pane of glass to manage those servers. Power management with UCS Manager, you can pretty much manage all your power through UCS Manager, your switches, and again, I can't stress enough the airflow to the rack. If you look at the data centers that are being built today, that are getting Energy Star ratings, they are built on how air is flowing through their data center. So in RTP, you look at the NetApp, they have two data centers, one's 2 years old and one just opened earlier this year. They're both Energy Star rating. They get tons of rebates from the energy company there. And it's because of how air flows through the data center. They shut down the hot aisles. They are enclosed and the air is pumped out there. They have air coming in from outside. They're using mostly unified fabric with 10 gig connections, so they have less cables. Air is allowed to flow through better. And just everything over together is just really helping them save on cost. Provisioning. So provisioning with UCS Manager, it eliminates manual configuration to a point. So you still have to manually configure it the first time at least. And if you have the same service profile, you don't have to configure it again. Service profile, policy-based management, seamless integration with existing tools. So if somebody's using BMC, HP tools, this will pretty much plug right into it, and you can start managing it from those other tools. And I have a list of those tools here in a few minutes. Expand the reach of the SMEs. And if you're looking at an IT department, you're going to have your network SME, your storage, administration guy. This really allows them to come together and set policies in one central location. You know, when you have to deploy a new server, you can pretty much take a server out of the box and put it into the chassis, and your server is ready to install VMware, Windows, Linux, whatever, usually in less than 20 minutes. I mean, you know, typically, traditionally, you have to unpack the server, you have to wrap it, you have to put 10 cables into the back of it, you've got to string those cables and try to get them into the little clump there. It takes much longer. System management, you've heard me talk about UCS Manager, that's what this is. It's kind of hard to see, but the tabs are on the top, you know, your general, your server, service profiles, it goes into networking, boot policies, and as I mentioned, you have 160 servers. Well, Paul, what if I get above 160 servers? What if I have a second data center? Can I take those policies and copy them over? Well, it's even better than that. UCS, they didn't have this at first, but then they come out with UCS Central. UCS Central will take any of your fabric interconnects on your domain that you can reach, and it will put it into one central location. And that's, so UCS Central. So, you know, this comes back to, you know, kind of your software-defined infrastructure. Now, you're sitting at your main office, and to where before you had that, you know, that branch, or, you know, if you're like a utility company, you have a small company with like 3 people, but you still need 1 or 2 servers there. You put the UCS Mini in there. It is now all being managed by UCS Central, and you can push out your policies to it, and you are now managing it from your location. You don't have to ask the, you know, the admin assistant to kind of, can you go look at this server? It should be labeled on the front with this name if nobody's taken it off. It should be on this shelf because nobody has moved it. It's there, we know where it's at. So deployment times is kind of what I'm talking about here. You know, 1 blade scenario to a 2 blade scenario. I don't know where they get these times from. Sorry. It takes more than 17 minutes to set up the UCS blade chassis. But I really like this because, you know, going from 1 to 2 blades, there's a lot of work in setting up that first blade with UCS. I mean, you have to define policies. There's a lot of work that goes into it. Let's not give credit. You know, let's not give the credit where it's due. But you know, when you take that second blade out of the box, it really is. You put the blade with the chassis, and you discover it, and you sign up the service profile and boot it up. That really does take just a few minutes to do. Versus a competitor to where you have service profiles, but you have to create that service profile for every server. So you're duplicating the work, even though it's, you know, it's a virtual service profile, you have to create it. Versus UCS Manager, to where you create profile templates. Once I create that template, I can essentially deploy 160 servers with it like that, with the templates. And it will put all 160 servers in there. All I have to do is assign it to a blade slot and power on that blade. It's very fast. And they don't really talk about here, but now with the newer C-Series models, you can do this with C-Series servers. So they essentially taking the old style management of setting up the server, installing it. You can basically do that now through UCS Manager, where it boots. You can boot up your C-Series to a SAN. So if your C-Series dies, it needs to be replaced. You can just replace it, assign the UCS profile with it, and okay, got a few minutes here. And so, you know, they've taken that B-Series ability and put it onto the C-Series. Again, I love booting from SAN. You know, I love being able to move that profile to a different set of hardware in just a few minutes and not have to spend all day rebooting. Ongoing administration. So we're talking about software-defined infrastructure. So you're saying, okay, now I can deploy my policies and everything through the Fabric Interconnect for my servers. What about my networking and storage? Well, a couple years ago, UCS bought a company called Clopia, and it's turned it into UCS Director. So now with literally one management console, I can go in and set up a switch. I can go and set up a storage device, and it's vendor neutral. So I can set up my NetApp, I can set up my EMC, set up my Nexus, my Cisco switches, my HP switches. If I do this all ahead of time, I was talking to a guy at NetApp who works on the FlexPod team. I mean, they basically got, after the NetApp is rack and stack, they can deploy and fully configure a NetApp FlexPod in, I think it was about 2 minutes. And that is basically just turning on the equipment, and UCS Director just pushes it out. The UCS management choices, these are some of the vendors: BMC, Red Hat, CA is a big management platform. If you have CA, you just add UCS to it. HP, VMware, it integrates into vCenter. This is more kind of just talking about, your subject matter experts, how, they're really just coming together in UCS Central, and you can manage multiple sites. System management, UCS Manager, eliminates system management license and management servers. So if you're buying a blade chassis, here's a good example. You typically have everything here on the left under function. I mean, this is all the stuff you want to do with your blade chassis or even your regular C-Series servers. And with traditional environment, you're having to buy different types of software, systems manager software. You have to buy out-of-bound management licenses. You have to buy a network manager. And as I said before, once you start getting past 4 chassis, you have to buy an enterprise manager. So it's just licenses that keep building up, versus UCS Manager, which is all included with the Fabric Interconnects. UCS Central is free. I think up until, it's free up to a certain point. Just a little, just to know that. This kind of demonstrates that. Here we have one chassis. You have one chassis, 16 blades, that's 16 out-of-band management licenses you have to buy. That's $400 each, list price. You add your second, again, another 16 more out-of-band managements. You have to buy another system manager for that chassis. Now you're starting to look at your enterprise manager, versus UCS, you go up to 160 servers, all under one domain, and you can manage it all from one place. So I just kind of threw up here some examples from Cisco.com. I encourage you to go to Cisco.com and look at their success stories. Here's Parkville School District, to where they use UCS to deploy their virtual desktop solution, and their capacity and the performance of it has basically really helped them get that VDI environment out there. Loughborough University over in the UK, they basically, I know I'm going to have time to get into the chart of numbers, but they basically cut their budget by 47% going with UCS over another vendor. And a big part of that was reduction in cables, reduction in power. I think this is one example to where they were looking at multiple racks of servers and then going down to one. And FlexPod and VDI. One thing I really like about FlexPod and deploying VDI on it is, you look at VDI, most people like to start kind of slow, build it into their environment. Well, the great thing about using a UCS B-Series chassis is the fact, you already know how many people you're going to be able to fit on one server. Typically, I like to say, they have Cisco has bundles, and those bundles will typically hold 100 users per server, 100 desktops. So we're looking at an environment. If you have 800 users, you know you can plan that I'm going to need 8 blades. So once you get up, you start getting up to 75 users. Okay, let me order that second blade. You just pop it in. You have the service profile. It comes up. With that, you just clone your boot to sand lung, and you're up within minutes. And now at this point, you're just adding your licensing to VMware. So you're really cutting down on your complexity and your management, how much it takes to get it out and running. And essentially, it just gives you more time to work on other stuff. Because I know I've been asking my boss for, 30-hour day. He has yet to give it to me. So that wraps up my presentation. One of my colleagues went around and handed out a form if you can fill it out and either give it back to the NWN booth downstairs or give it back to me. Does anybody have any questions? All good? Okay. This is very cool, and I'd be very happy to talk to you about it. Just really quick, I basically left the company a few years ago because I went to my manager when UCS came out. I'm like, this is very cool. And he told me that it's not going to go anywhere.